The gospel for this day is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, and I believe it's chapter 16. Get to the right page. Yes, it is still chapter 16. I invite you to stand as you listen to God's word and gospel. From that time on, after Peter confessed that Jesus was the Messiah, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great sufferings at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, they must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. I invite my children and friends to come up for a message. Come on up, kids. This morning, folks, we're going to be looking at the text that Sandy read from Jeremiah. A little background. The book of Jeremiah was written, what we think is in the years just prior to and after the fall of Jerusalem in the year 586 BC. The Babylonians were attacking them, and Jeremiah was calling the people to find a new life and remember where their strength comes from, and he was feeling very discouraged. He felt like actually he was being betrayed by God's people and actually betrayed by God himself. And that gave rise to what we heard Sandy read in verse 18 of Jeremiah 15. Speaking to God now. "Why is my pain unceasing, my wound incurable, refusing to be healed?" Jeremiah goes on to say, in whether it's verse 18 or 19, he said, "God, you're like a brook that now doesn't deliver any water at all. You are completely dry and you don't offer anything to help me with my thirst that is so significant." You see, what Jeremiah is really teaching us, folks, is what the Psalms know more about is lamenting. To lament is to express yourself to God when the heart is heavy and you don't exactly know what to put into words. Most of us have been there. If you have never been there, you may be one day. You'll know it. Because your days and those endless nights when your mind and spirit cannot go to rest are caught in a tornado of pain and questions and internal struggles. You know it when you're there. So what do you say when your heart is breaking? When that pain lingers on for hours and days and you feel abandoned? Today, that's what we're talking about when we express ourselves to God during those moments of life. For some of us this morning, I am very sure that the term lament and its expression might be something brand new for you. Some of us may have thought that we could do it, but we didn't know that was right because we thought we were taught that being honest with God with our pain is something that's not right. And then others of us just have been shut down when we've been honest with that expression, and we haven't done it since. But friends, the good news today is that we're discovering that lamenting is a gift. It is a gift that God intended for God's people to express themselves openly and honestly. That opens the door to healing and wholeness. Marva Dawn is a Lutheran theologian and also a very avid writer. She tells about the period in her life when she was going through some health issues, significant health issues, and her husband chose to leave her during that time. Her suffering seemed to unravel in other ways as well, and she wrote a book following up after midst of walking and living through those series of mishaps, and she entitled the book, How Long, O Lord? See, Marva Dawn was quoting from Psalm 35, a lament psalm that says, How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? That's a lament. My life had been relatively free of crises up till then. A loving family, wonderful parents, siblings that were so caring, good health with everybody in the family, and it was celebrated greatly. At the time, I had a vivacious little 4-year-old daughter who had curly hair beyond words, and she was the love of my life, Michelle. And then Michelle's brother was born, Ryan, in Wilmer. And at the moment of his birth, when Dr. Mellum attended to him and brought him back into the room, he reported very somberly but very directly that he was quite sure that our new gift of life had Down syndrome. That night, I traveled to the University of Minnesota Hospital for surgery for Ryan because his intestines were closed off from his stomach, so he needed that opened for any nourishment whatsoever. I can't remember much of those miles between Wilmer, where he was born, and Minneapolis, where the hospital was. But I do remember racing in my mind questions, some of which I could put into words, and others just betrayed words altogether. I didn't know what I was looking for. I did not know what I was hungering for and what I needed to express and what I didn't know what to express. I didn't know that it was okay, folks. I didn't know it was okay to be honest with God of my pain at that time. And with all the questions that were flooding through my mind, I thought to myself, can I say this to you or not? You see, I was longing. I was hungering for permission to lament, but I didn't know it. Why? I don't know if I was taught that it was wrong to lament and shake your fist in the air and say, God, I trusted you, and now I'm in a time of need, and where are you now? I didn't know that I was taught that that was wrong, or I assumed that being honest with God is just not the thing to do. I don't know where I was back then. But I do know something now. That after reading the scriptures more openly since that time, I'm discovering that lament is a part of the life of the healthy Christian life. I'm inviting you to join me to learn how to lament this morning. This might be something brand new again, like I said before, and some of you might be opposed to it totally. Be open to it. Because as we learn to lament, we are inviting God, we hear God say to us to be honest with our pain. Rob Bell is a very creative pastor and speaks very well about many subjects in life, but when it comes to suffering, he's come to the conclusion that suffering always demands expression. Jeremiah was honest with God with his pain, and he could express it in a way in which that sounded like fists being shaken in the air. Where are you, God, when I need you? Why is my pain unceasing and my wound incurable, refusing to be healed? See, Jeremiah heard God invite him to be honest with his pain. Marva Dawn wrote that book because she was convinced that God was inviting her to be honest with her pain as well. And early in my ministry, before Ryan was born, I interpreted Jeremiah, the one that knew how to lament clearly, and I called him a weeping prophet and a whining prophet. And do you know why? Because I wasn't comfortable with what he was doing. And I thought it would be more comfortable to label him as whining and complaining than to see it as a possible strength to offer anybody. But friends, it's important for us to understand there's a difference between whining and complaining and lamenting. Whining and lamenting both name a loss or a disappointment. They both experience that part of it. But whining and complaining however, will only lead us into a deeper darkness of the soul, where those ashes appear to be somewhat cooled down, but they also quickly flare up with greater discontentment, but they stay there and they seem to simmer. The lament, on the other hand, is a cry out to God with honesty, that God says, I hear you in your pain, and I welcome you to be honest with all of your questions. But we're expressing that to a God who we know that had promised to care for us. And in that cry, we plead to hear that distant whisper of hope. You see, what we're saying, friends, is that a lament is a bold, very bold expression of our pain, and a bold and honest expression of our questions to God, who promised to be with us. Really, what we're saying here is that lament is a form of prayer that I don't think that all of us understood before. When I was at Lutheran Bible Institute after I graduated from Augsburg College, there was a speaker there that was himself raised in a Jewish family. He married, of all things, a Norwegian Lutheran from South Dakota. And after moving to South Dakota, he discovered that this grace thing that Lutherans had in talking about Jesus as the one who loves us right where we are, won his heart over. And he himself became not only a Lutheran, but a Lutheran pastor. But in speaking to his students at LBI, he said, I've learned some things about being out in the prairies of South Dakota listening to you Lutheran pastors pray. He says, I don't get you. He said, the land is completely dry and barren, and there hasn't been rain for months, and the crops are dying, and the livestock are in great need of the produce. And then the pastor gets up on Sunday morning saying, Dear Lord, the ground is kind of dry, and we could use some rain now and then. He says, wake up, pastors. Where is your feeling for these farmers and for their livestock and that crop that is hungry? Lord, you promised to be with us. Send that rain. Does that make sense to some of us? Some of us Scandinavians know how to make it sound so pious. And what this wonderful speaker was saying, be honest to God with what your pain and your concerns really are. But the second thing about lamenting is that lamenting is naming our pain clearly. In our culture, we are driven by technology and social media, and every aspect of that has its own vernacular and rules of usage. And I don't tweet, but I know somebody in the high office that tweets a lot, and he can't get any more than 140 characters in one tweet, and that's the rules of tweeting. Facebook has its own rules too. But when it comes to our losses and our suffering, folks, technology and social media just doesn't cut it. We need something new. The old traditions and the use of technology and even piety just betrays us. There's something about that internal struggle with our issues that go along with us that calls forth a new language, and that language is the lament. God is saying, name your pain clearly and I will listen. We've already mentioned that some of us have maybe thought about lamenting, but thinking that it's not right for God, but God won't accept it. But there's another reason why some of us don't lament, is because we don't think other people will want to hear it either. You see, what I'm speaking of here is that a serious obstruction to expressing our pain is that some of our friends, and many of them are our Christian friends, who will say, oh, but God is so good, God will watch over you, you're going to be just fine. What they're really saying is, stop lamenting, because I can't listen to the way that you're so honest and naming your pain before God. You see, we're living in a culture of denial, aren't we? Where we don't want to be honest with the real issues of life, especially the painful issues. We'd rather just avoid them or think that if we don't talk about them, somehow they'll just go away, or at least I will feel better. Friends, the reality is that if we do lament, expect to receive people's obstruction. You see, lamenting is very disruptive, because it forces all of us to be honest with the pain that we're experiencing. And I'm convinced that's the reason why we call Jeremiah a weeping prophet, is because we didn't want to hear him be so honest before God. What I'm saying here, folks, is that if you're at right now, or if you ever get there, and you feel that desire for that language of lament to be the only expression that's available to you, find some place or some person who will listen to you without any judgment, but will accept that and listen to that as the way that God hears it, with complete openness. Yes, we live in a culture of denial, friends, and that's why being a part of a church that understands that, and understands that we will never put each other down if we express the concern that we have as we shake our fists in the air and don't understand what's going on. Speaking about a culture of denial, you know, in our litany that we have, or lectionary that we have, it's a 3-year cycle, so all of our scriptures rotate every 3 years. Talk about a culture of denial. Do you know that there isn't a single psalm of lament included in the 3-year cycle? Even as a church, we have not been able to say to each other, this is God's gift of openness to you. Because as we learn to be honest to God, our pain, then God finally says lamenting will open you up to healing. If you get a chance to read some of the lament psalms, I encourage you to do that this week as your homework. You may want to start with Psalm 35, which Marva Don used. And in Psalm 35, like many of the other Psalms of lament, they come out shaking their fists at the air, asking those hard questions. But almost every single one of the Psalms, by the time they're done, they come to the conclusion, they say, but God, I know you didn't cause this, but where else do I go with it? You see, what the psalmist is really saying to us, folks, is that lamenting has its own therapeutic and release system that is God-given, and God says, give it to me, I can handle it, it's good for you. But by the time you're done, you can almost turn around and say that, I know that you hear me, and I know that you're here, but I just don't feel it right now, God. Do you hear what I'm saying? That healthy lamenting many times in some way or some form turn from the pain to the confidence that God indeed is there, even though at times it feels like you are so alone. And so when we speak of our pain, in those moments when it seems like we're out of order in God's world, what happens is that we're opening ourselves up to healing. Complaining and whining, that's an end in itself. But lamenting has the ability to empty yourself so that you can open the window to make room for the fresh air of God's promise and healing to come. Learning to lament, my friends, is so important. And if you're not there now, or if you've never been there before, blessings to you. But my hunch is that the day may come when that internal warfare is going to happen, and you're going to say, what language do I have to express it? Think about lamenting. Because it invites us to be honest in our expression and open ourselves up to a God who has a gift in waiting for us. Yes, lamenting is so far from complaining. It's a gift that God gives us to find wholeness. Well, my son Ryan turns 36 years of age on September 11th, and God has been so faithful. Ryan has his issues that will continue on for the rest of his life, and that's okay. But Ryan is such a delight. Ryan is my beloved son, but he's so much more than that. He's my teacher. He's my spiritual mentor. He's the one who shows me how to live in grace when I try my best to put it into words. Ryan is the one who would offer the shirt off his back and every shirt in his closet to give to anybody in need. And he'll even fold it up and give it to you before he gives it to you. As an aside, he folds everything. A 3-day trip on the motorcycle, I had to put things away when the dirty clothes were supposed to go in one bag. He wouldn't shove it in there. He would fold his dirty clothes to put it in the laundry. Folks, he did not inherit that from his dad. I'll guarantee you that. Ryan knows how to live with such a grace and with such an unbounded joy. And Ryan will love you and your neighbors. And he doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat. He doesn't care if you're Norwegian or Swedish. He doesn't care if you're gay or straight. He says, you are God's gift to me. Friends, I need to learn from Ryan. And I think 36 years ago I was lamenting and asking all the questions. God was, meanwhile, preparing me for the gift that was coming. You see, learning to lament is liberating. Learning to lament is not only therapeutic, but it gives birth to a freedom to become all that God has intended for us to be as God's beloved children, right where you are.